The rain fell hard on the dark streets of downtown Seattle. Sarah Martinez pulled her hood up as she walked quickly toward the parking garage. It was past midnight and the city felt empty except for the occasional car passing by. She had just finished a long meeting at the naval headquarters, discussing classified operations that would keep her busy for weeks. Sarah looked like any other woman walking alone at night. She was average height, with dark hair tied back in a simple ponytail. Her jeans and black jacket made her blend into the shadows. Most people who saw her would never guess what she really did for a living. They would never imagine that this quiet woman was one of the most powerful people in the United States Navy. As she reached the parking garage, Sarah noticed 3 men standing near the entrance. They were talking loudly and drinking from bottles wrapped in paper bags. Their voices echoed off the concrete walls. Sarah had learned long ago to trust her instincts, and something about these men made her uncomfortable. But she needed to get to her car, and this was the only way. She walked past them, keeping her head down and moving steadily. For a moment it seemed like she would make it through without any trouble. Then one of the men called out to her, "Hey, pretty lady, where are you going so fast?" Sarah didn't stop or look back. She had dealt with situations like this before, though not recently. Her training had taught her that sometimes the best response was no response at all. She continued walking toward the elevator that would take her to the 3rd floor where her car was parked. "I'm talking to you," the man shouted, his voice getting angry. Sarah heard footsteps behind her, moving faster now. She reached into her pocket and felt for her keys, making sure they were ready. The elevator was still 20 feet away. She could hear the men getting closer. "Don't ignore us, lady. That's not very friendly." Sarah finally stopped and turned around. The 3 men had spread out behind her, blocking her path back to the street. They were all bigger than her, and they looked like they had been drinking for hours. The one in the middle, who seemed to be their leader, had a nasty smile on his face. "We just want to talk," he said, but his tone suggested something very different. "I'm not interested in talking," Sarah replied calmly. "Please let me pass," the men laughed. "Please let me pass," one of them repeated in a mocking voice. "She thinks she's too good for us." Sarah assessed the situation quickly. There were 3 of them and 1 of her. The parking garage was empty, and no one would hear if she called for help. The men were drunk, which made them unpredictable but also slower. She could probably handle them, but she hoped it wouldn't come to that. "Look, I don't want any trouble," she said. "I'm just trying to get to my car." "Maybe we don't want to let you go to your car," the leader said. He took a step closer. "Maybe we think you should spend some time with us first." Sarah backed toward the wall, not because she was scared, but because she needed something solid behind her. Her mind was already working through different scenarios. She had been in much more dangerous situations than this, in places far from home where her life depended on making the right choices in seconds. "I really think you should reconsider," she said quietly. The men found this hilarious. "She thinks we should reconsider," one of them said. "Like she's in charge here." That's when they made their first mistake. The leader rushed forward and grabbed Sarah by the shoulders, slamming her back against the concrete wall. The impact was hard enough to knock the breath out of most people. But Sarah had been through much worse training than this. "Now you're going to listen to us," he said. His face inches from hers. Sarah didn't struggle or cry out. Instead, she looked directly into his eyes with a calmness that should have warned him he was making a terrible mistake. But he was too drunk and too confident to notice. "You picked the wrong person tonight," she said softly. The man laughed again. "Did I? And what are you going to do about it, little girl?" His friends moved closer, surrounding her. They thought they had an easy target, a woman alone who would be too frightened to fight back. They had no idea that they were about to discover just how wrong they were. Sarah had spent years learning how to read people, how to stay calm under pressure, and how to turn apparent weakness into strength. These skills had kept her alive in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. 3 drunk men in a parking garage were not going to be her biggest challenge. "Last chance," she said. "Walk away now and we can all pretend this never happened." But the men were past the point of walking away. They had committed to this course of action, and now they would have to face the consequences. The leader tightened his grip on her shoulders, not knowing that he was about to learn a lesson he would never forget. Sarah closed her eyes for just a moment, centering herself the way she had been taught so many years ago. When she opened them again, she was no longer just a woman trying to get to her car. She was Admiral Sarah Martinez, one of the most decorated officers in the Navy SEALs, and these men were about to find out what that really meant. The rain continued to fall outside, washing the streets clean, but inside the parking garage 3 men were about to discover that appearances could be very deceiving, and that sometimes the person who looks most vulnerable is actually the most dangerous one in the room. The leader's grip on Sarah's shoulders was tight, but not tight enough. In one smooth motion, Sarah brought her hands up between his arms and struck outward, breaking his hold. Before he could react, she grabbed his right wrist and twisted it in a way that sent him stumbling backward. "What the hell?" he shouted, shaking his hand in pain. The other 2 men stepped forward, thinking their friend just needed help. They still didn't understand what they were dealing with. Sarah could see the confusion in their eyes. They expected her to cower or beg, not fight back with the precision of someone who had been trained for combat. "I warned you," Sarah said, settling into a fighting stance that would have been familiar to anyone who had served in special operations. The second man, bigger than the first, lunged at her. Sarah sidestepped easily and used his momentum against him, grabbing his arm and using a hip throw that sent him crashing into a concrete pillar. The sound echoed through the parking garage like a gunshot. The third man hesitated for a moment, finally beginning to realize that this wasn't going the way they had planned. But he was drunk and angry about his friends getting hurt, so he pulled out a knife from his jacket pocket. "Now we're talking," he said, waving the blade at her. "Let's see how tough you are with this." Sarah looked at the knife calmly. She had faced men with much better weapons and far more training. A drunk man with a pocket knife was not going to intimidate someone who had disarmed trained terrorists in the middle of active combat zones. "Put the knife down," she said. "This doesn't have to get worse." But the man with the knife was beyond listening to reason. He rushed forward, slashing wildly. Sarah moved like she was dancing, avoiding each swing with minimal effort. She had been taught by some of the best close combat instructors in the military, and their training was showing now. When the man overextended on one of his swings, Sarah stepped inside his reach and struck him in the wrist with a precise blow that made him drop the knife immediately. Before he could even process what had happened, she had grabbed him and thrown him to the ground. All 3 men were now on the concrete floor of the parking garage, groaning and trying to figure out what had just happened to them. The entire fight had lasted less than 30 seconds. Sarah stood over them, not even breathing hard. "I tried to warn you," she said, "but you wouldn't listen." The leader was the first to get back on his feet. His wrist was already swelling where Sarah had twisted it, and there was a look in his eyes that was part fear and part rage. He couldn't accept that a woman had just defeated all 3 of them without breaking a sweat. "Who are you?" he demanded. Sarah considered how to answer that question. She could tell them the truth, but they probably wouldn't believe her. She could make something up, but that seemed unnecessary at this point. Instead, she decided to let her actions speak for themselves. "I'm someone you should have left alone," she said simply. The man who had been thrown into the pillar was now sitting up, holding his head. Blood was trickling from a cut on his forehead where he had hit the concrete. He looked at Sarah with a mixture of confusion and newfound respect. "Are you some kind of cop?" he asked. "Something like that," Sarah replied. She was about to tell them to leave when she heard footsteps coming from the stairwell. Someone else was entering the parking garage. Sarah tensed, wondering if these 3 men had friends she didn't know about. But when the door opened, she saw a security guard in uniform. "Is everything okay here?" the guard called out, shining his flashlight in their direction. The 3 men looked at each other, then at Sarah. They were clearly trying to decide what to tell the guard. They could claim that Sarah had attacked them, but they would have to explain why 3 grown men were on the ground after fighting with 1 woman. That wouldn't look good for them. "We were just leaving," the leader said, getting to his feet slowly. The security guard looked skeptical. He could see that there had been some kind of fight, but he couldn't tell exactly what had happened. His flashlight moved from the 3 men to Sarah, trying to assess the situation. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" he asked. "I'm fine," Sarah said. "These gentlemen were just helping me find my car." It was a polite lie, but one that gave everyone a way out of the situation without making it more complicated. The security guard didn't look like he completely believed it, but he could see that Sarah wasn't injured and didn't seem upset. The 3 men took the hint and started walking toward the exit. The one with the hurt wrist was still holding it against his chest. The one who had been thrown into the pillar was walking unsteadily. The third one kept looking back at Sarah like he was trying to memorize her face. "Wait," the leader said, stopping at the door. "What's your name?" Sarah considered not answering, but something about the way he asked made her think he had learned something from this encounter. Maybe he wouldn't make the same mistake again with someone else. "Sarah," she said. "Well, Sarah," he said, "I don't know what you do for a living, but you're not what you appear to be." He was right about that, but probably not in the way he was thinking. The man had no idea that he had just tried to assault someone who regularly briefed the Secretary of Defense, someone who had led operations that most people would never hear about, someone whose decisions affected national security. "None of us are exactly what we appear to be," Sarah replied. The three men left without another word. The security guard watched them go, then turned back to Sarah. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked. That looked like more than just asking for directions. "I can take care of myself," Sarah said. "But thank you for checking." The guard nodded and went back to his rounds. Sarah finally walked to the elevator and pressed the button. As she waited for it to arrive, she thought about what had just happened. It had been a long time since she had been in a situation like that. Usually people knew who she was before they met her. They treated her with the respect that came with her rank and her reputation. Tonight had been different. Tonight she had just been Sarah, a woman walking alone in a parking garage. And when three men had tried to take advantage of what they saw as weakness, they had discovered that they were very wrong about who they were dealing with. The elevator arrived and Sarah stepped inside. As the doors closed, she allowed herself a small smile. It had actually felt good to use her training again, even under these circumstances. She had spent so much time in meetings and behind desks lately that she had almost forgotten how much she enjoyed the physical challenges of her profession. But as the elevator carried her up to the third floor, Sarah was already thinking about the real challenges that waited for her tomorrow. The meeting she had just left was only the beginning of a mission that would test everything she had learned in her years of service. Sarah's car was a simple black sedan that looked like something any office worker might drive. There were no military decals or special license plates that would give away her real identity. She had learned long ago that sometimes the best protection was being invisible, blending in with everyone else around her. As she drove through the empty streets toward her apartment, Sarah's mind was already shifting back to the briefing she had just attended. The encounter in the parking garage had been an unwelcome distraction, but it was over now. She had more important things to think about. Her phone rang through the car's speaker system. The caller ID showed a number she recognized immediately. Admiral James Patterson, her commanding officer and one of the few people who knew the full extent of her responsibilities. "Martinez here," she answered. "Sarah, I hope I didn't wake you," Patterson said. "I know it's late, but we just received some new intelligence that changes everything we discussed tonight." Sarah wasn't surprised. In her line of work, situations changed rapidly and without warning. Plans that seemed solid one day could become completely useless the next. "What kind of changes?" she asked. "The kind that means we need to move our timeline up by several weeks. Can you come back to headquarters? I'm calling in the full team." Sarah checked the clock on her dashboard. It was almost 1 in the morning, but that didn't matter. When national security was involved, normal schedules didn't apply. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. She turned the car around and headed back toward the naval headquarters. As she drove, Sarah thought about how her life had become so different from what she had originally planned. 20 years ago, when she first joined the Navy, she never imagined she would end up where she was now. Sarah had grown up in a small town in Texas, the daughter of a mechanic and a school teacher. She was a good student who played soccer and volunteered at the local animal shelter. Her parents had hopes that she would become a doctor or a lawyer, something safe and respectable. But Sarah had always been drawn to challenges that other people avoided. In high school, she was the first girl to try out for the wrestling team. In college, she studied engineering and was one of only 3 women in her graduating class. When she decided to join the Navy, her parents were worried but not entirely surprised. What did surprise everyone, including Sarah herself, was how quickly she excelled in military training. She had a natural ability to stay calm under pressure and to think clearly when everything around her was chaotic. Her instructors noticed these qualities and recommended her for advanced training. The Navy SEALs had only recently begun allowing women to attempt their training program when Sarah applied. The physical requirements were brutal, and the mental challenges were even harder. Out of the 24 people who started the program with her, only 4 completed it. Sarah was the only woman, but finishing SEAL training was just the beginning. Sarah's real talents became apparent when she was assigned to intelligence operations. She had a gift for understanding complex situations and finding solutions that others missed. She could speak 3 languages fluently and had an almost photographic memory for details. Over the years, Sarah had been involved in operations that most people would never know about. She had infiltrated terrorist organizations in the Middle East, gathered intelligence on foreign governments, and coordinated rescue missions in hostile territory. Each success led to more responsibility and higher security clearances. Now at 38 years old, Sarah held one of the most sensitive positions in the entire military. As a SEAL Admiral, she was responsible for planning and overseeing special operations around the world. The decisions she made could affect international relations and the safety of American citizens everywhere. But tonight, as she parked her car at headquarters for the second time, Sarah looked just like any other woman working late at her job. The security guards who checked her identification card saw her almost every day, but most of them had no idea what she actually did inside the building. The meeting room on the 7th floor was already full when Sarah arrived. She recognized the faces around the table: intelligence analysts, communication specialists, and other officers who worked on the most classified operations. These were people she trusted with her life and who trusted her with theirs. Admiral Patterson stood at the front of the room next to a large screen showing satellite images. His expression was serious, which meant the situation was more urgent than Sarah had thought. "Thank you all for coming back so late," Patterson began. "What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room. We have confirmed intelligence that a terrorist organization has acquired weapons that could threaten major American cities." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. This was the kind of scenario they trained for but hoped would never happen. She looked around the table and saw the same concern on everyone else's faces. "How credible is this intelligence?" asked Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, one of the analysts. "Very credible," Patterson replied. "We have multiple sources confirming the same information. The weapons are being moved through a network that we've been monitoring for months." He clicked a button, and the screen changed to show a map with several locations marked in red. Sarah recognized some of the cities. They were major ports on the East Coast. "We believe the weapons will be smuggled into the country through one of these ports within the next 2 weeks. Patterson continued. "Our job is to identify which port and intercept the shipment before it reaches its destination." Sarah raised her hand. "What kind of weapons are we talking about?" Patterson's expression became even more serious. "Chemical weapons, enough to contaminate several city blocks and kill thousands of people." The room was silent for a moment as everyone absorbed this information. Sarah had dealt with dangerous situations before, but the thought of chemical weapons in the hands of terrorists was terrifying. "What resources do we have available?" she asked. "That's where you come in, Sarah," Patterson said. "We need someone to go undercover and gather intelligence from inside the smuggling network. Someone with your language skills and your ability to blend in with different environments." Sarah nodded. She had done similar operations before, though none with stakes quite this high. Going undercover meant leaving behind her normal life and becoming someone else entirely. It meant risking not just her own life, but potentially the lives of thousands of innocent people if she failed. "How much time do I have to prepare?" she asked. 72 hours, Patterson replied. "After that, you'll need to be in position and ready to make contact with our sources. 3 days to prepare for a mission that could determine whether a major terrorist attack succeeded or failed." Sarah had worked with shorter timelines before, but this would be challenging even by her standards. As the meeting continued, Sarah took notes and asked questions about the details of the operation, but part of her mind was still thinking about what had happened in the parking garage earlier that night. Those 3 men had seen her as an easy target, someone they could push around without consequences. If they only knew that the woman they had slammed against the wall was about to embark on a mission to save thousands of lives, they would probably have a very different opinion of her, but that was exactly the point. Sarah's greatest strength was that nobody expected someone who looked like her to be capable of what she could do. In 3 days, she would disappear into a dangerous world where one mistake could be fatal. But for now, she was just Sarah Martinez, taking notes in a meeting room and planning to save her country from an attack that most people would never know was coming. The next morning, Sarah stood in front of her bathroom mirror, looking at a face that would soon belong to someone else entirely. In 48 hours, Sarah Martinez would temporarily cease to exist, replaced by Elena Vasquez, a small-time smuggler looking to make connections with bigger criminal organizations. Sarah had spent the early morning hours studying the background that her team had created for Elena. She was supposedly from Miami, had been arrested twice for minor drug offenses, and was known in certain circles as someone who could move goods across borders without asking too many questions. The identity was solid enough to pass casual investigation, but not so impressive that it would draw unwanted attention. Creating a believable cover identity was an art form that Sarah had mastered over years of undercover work. It wasn't enough to memorize facts about a fake person. She had to become that person. Think like them, react like them, and never slip out of character even for a moment. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the team's psychological profiler. "Lab ready for identity session. Come when convenient." Sarah grabbed her keys and headed to headquarters. The lab was actually a specially designed room where operatives could practice their cover identities in realistic scenarios. It was equipped with hidden cameras and microphones that recorded everything, allowing the team to analyze performance and identify any potential weaknesses. When Sarah arrived, Dr. Walsh was waiting with a folder full of notes and a recording device. Jennifer was one of the smartest people Sarah had ever worked with, someone who could read human behavior like other people read books. "How are you feeling about the Elena identity?" Jennifer asked. "Confident," Sarah replied. "The background feels natural and I've worked similar covers before." "Good. But this operation is different from your previous assignments. The people you'll be dealing with are more dangerous and more paranoid than usual. They kill people for making small mistakes." Sarah knew Jennifer was right. The terrorist organization they were targeting had a reputation for extreme violence. They had killed their own members for minor security breaches. An undercover operative caught in their organization wouldn't just be arrested. She would disappear forever. "Let's run through some scenarios," Jennifer said. "I want to test your reactions under stress." For the next 2 hours, Jennifer put Sarah through a series of role-playing exercises. She pretended to be suspicious criminals asking probing questions about Elena's background. She created scenarios where Sarah had to think quickly and stay in character while dealing with unexpected challenges. During one exercise, Jennifer played the role of a paranoid drug dealer who was convinced that Elena was working for law enforcement. She pushed Sarah hard, asking detailed questions about people and places that Elena should know. "You're telling me you worked with Carlos Mendez in Miami, but you don't know the name of his boat?" Jennifer demanded, staying completely in character. Sarah didn't hesitate. "Carlos had 3 boats. Which one are you talking about? The fishing boat he used for tourist charters or one of the others?" It was a perfect response. Instead of getting defensive or trying to guess the right answer, Sarah had turned the question around and made it seem like the questioner didn't know what he was talking about. Jennifer made notes on her clipboard, clearly pleased with the reaction. After the role-playing session, Sarah went to the technical support department to get her equipment. The gear for this mission had to be completely invisible to anyone who might search her. Hidden cameras, listening devices, and emergency communicators were all disguised as everyday objects that Elena would naturally carry. Agent Marcus Chen, the team's technology specialist, handed Sarah a smartphone that looked exactly like any other phone someone in Elena's situation might have. But this phone had special modifications that allowed it to send encrypted messages even when it appeared to be turned off. "The emergency beacon is built into the battery," Marcus explained. "If you're in serious trouble, hold down the volume buttons and the power button at the same time for 5 seconds. It will send your location to us immediately." Sarah tested the phone's various functions, making sure she understood how to use them without looking suspicious. The last thing she needed was to fumble with unfamiliar technology while pretending to be someone else. "What about weapons?" Sarah asked. Marcus handed her a pen that looked completely ordinary. "Twist the top 3 times counterclockwise and it becomes a small but effective blade. The blade is ceramic, so it won't show up on metal detectors." Sarah practiced the motion until she could do it smoothly without looking down. The weapon was small, but in the right hands it could be deadly. She hoped she wouldn't need to use it, but experience had taught her to always be prepared for the worst. That afternoon, Sarah met with the intelligence team to review everything they knew about the smuggling network. The operation was run by a man named Viktor Petrov, a former Russian military officer who had turned to crime after the fall of the Soviet Union. Petrov was smart, ruthless, and extremely careful about who he worked with. Petrov doesn't trust anyone, explained Agent Lisa Thompson, who had been tracking him for 3 years. He's survived this long because he assumes everyone is trying to betray him. Getting close to him will be extremely difficult. The plan was for Elena to start small, establishing credibility with lower-level members of the organization. If she proved herself reliable and useful, she might eventually be trusted with bigger operations that could lead her to Petrov himself. The good news is that they need people like Elena, Thompson continued, someone with her background who can move freely in American ports. The bad news is that they test new recruits by giving them extremely dangerous assignments. Sarah studied photographs of known members of Petrov's organization. She memorized faces, names, and backgrounds, building a mental database that she could access instantly if needed. These people would be suspicious of any newcomer, looking for signs that Elena wasn't who she claimed to be. As evening approached, Sarah returned to her apartment to pack for the mission. She couldn't take anything that belonged to her real life. Elena's clothes, jewelry, and personal items had been carefully selected to match her supposed background and personality. Looking around her apartment, Sarah realized how different her real life was from the identity she was about to assume. Her bookshelves were filled with military history and tactical manuals. Her closet contained dress uniforms and formal wear for official functions. The refrigerator was covered with commendations and photos from military ceremonies. Elena's life would be much simpler and more dangerous. She would live in cheap hotels and eat at diners. She would carry a gun illegally and lie about everything important. She would have to convince hardened criminals that she was one of them, all while gathering the intelligence needed to stop a terrorist attack. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Admiral Patterson. "How's the preparation going?" he asked. "Everything's on schedule," Sarah replied. "I'll be ready to deploy tomorrow evening." "Good. I just wanted you to know that we've received additional intelligence confirming the threat. This operation is more important than ever." After Patterson hung up, Sarah sat on her couch and thought about what lay ahead. In less than 24 hours, she would enter a world where violence was common and trust was non-existent. She would be surrounded by people who would kill her without hesitation if they discovered her true identity. But Sarah had done this kind of work before, and she knew she could do it again. The 3 men in the parking garage had learned that appearances could be deceiving. Soon, some of the most dangerous criminals in the world would learn the same lesson. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah's last thought was about the thousands of innocent people who had no idea their lives might depend on her success. They would go to work tomorrow, pick up their children from school, and plan their weekends, never knowing that a woman they had never met was risking everything to keep them safe. That responsibility was heavy, but it was also what drove Sarah to be the best at what she did. She had sworn an oath to protect her country, and she intended to keep that promise no matter what the cost. Elena Vasquez stepped off the bus in Baltimore's Harbor District, carrying a worn duffel bag and wearing clothes that had seen better days. Her hair was dyed black and styled differently than Sarah's usual look. Colored contact lenses changed her eye color, and carefully applied makeup made her appear older and harder than she really was. The transformation was complete. Sarah Martinez no longer existed. In her place was a woman with a criminal record, a Spanish accent that she could turn on and off as needed, and a story that would hold up under investigation. Elena's first stop was a rundown hotel near the docks. The desk clerk barely looked up when she paid cash for a week's stay. The room smelled like cigarettes and disinfectant, and the window looked out over the industrial part of the harbor, where cargo ships loaded and unloaded their containers. From her window, Elena could see the exact location where intelligence suggested the chemical weapons might be smuggled into the country. But getting close to that operation would require patience and careful planning. One wrong move would blow her cover and probably get her killed. Elena spent her first day walking around the neighborhood, learning the layout and getting a feel for the local criminal scene. She ate at a diner where dock workers gathered for lunch and listened to their conversations. She bought cigarettes at a corner store where the owner clearly knew more about the neighborhood's illegal activities than he let on. On her second day, Elena made her first real contact. She had identified a bar called Murphy's Tavern as a place where small-time criminals gathered to make deals and share information. The intelligence team had told her that several members of Petrov's organization were known to drink there. Elena walked into Murphy's at 5 in the afternoon, when the after-work crowd was starting to arrive. The bar was dark and smoky, with country music playing on an old jukebox. She ordered a beer and sat at the end of the bar where she could watch the room without being obvious about it. After an hour of nursing her drink and reading a newspaper, Elena noticed a man at a corner table who matched the description of Tony Marcelli, one of Petrov's lower-level associates. Marcelli was talking quietly with two other men, occasionally glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Elena waited until Marcelli went to the bathroom, then deliberately bumped into him on his way back to his table. "Sorry," she said, putting on her Spanish accent. "I wasn't watching where I was going." Marcelli looked her up and down, clearly curious about this woman he didn't recognize. In a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else, strangers were always noticed. "No problem," he said. "You're not from around here." "Just moved up from Miami," Elena replied. "Looking for work opportunities." It was a careful choice of words. In this environment, work opportunities could mean legal employment or something much more profitable and dangerous. Elena wanted to leave it open to interpretation. "What kind of work?" Marcelli asked. Elena shrugged. "Whatever pays well and doesn't ask too many questions." Marcelli studied her face for a moment, trying to decide if she was serious or if she might be law enforcement. Elena met his gaze steadily, not too eager but not backing down either. "Buy you a drink?" he offered. "Sure," Elena said. They returned to Marcelli's table where his companions looked at Elena with obvious suspicion. She didn't try to win them over or ask too many questions. Instead, she told carefully crafted stories about her fictional life in Miami, dropping names of real criminals that the intelligence team had researched. After 2 hours of conversation, Marcelli seemed convinced that Elena was legitimate. He gave her his phone number and told her to call if she heard about any interesting opportunities. This neighborhood can be good for people who know how to mind their own business, he said. Elena thanked him and left the bar, feeling like the first phase of her mission had gone well. But she knew this was just the beginning. Earning Marcelli's trust was a small step toward getting close to the real operation. Over the next several days, Elena built her reputation in the neighborhood. She did small favors for people, asked the right questions, and carefully avoided drawing too much attention to herself. She learned that Marcelli was indeed connected to larger criminal operations, but he was still far from the inner circle where the real decisions were made. Elena's breakthrough came when she overheard a conversation at the diner. Two men at the next table were complaining about a driver who had failed to show up for an important delivery. They needed someone reliable, who could handle cargo without asking questions about what was inside the containers. Elena approached their table during a moment when the diner was nearly empty. "Excuse me," she said. "I couldn't help overhearing that you need a driver. I might be interested." The two men looked at her skeptically. One of them, a heavy-set man with tattoos covering his arms, laughed. You don't look like you could handle a delivery truck." Elena smiled. "Looks can be deceiving. I've been driving trucks since I was 16. My father had a shipping business in Miami before he got into legal trouble." She pulled out her phone and showed them a fake commercial driver's license that the technical team had created. The document looked completely authentic and would pass any computer check. "The question is whether you can keep your mouth shut," the other man said. "I've kept my mouth shut about plenty of things," Elena replied. "That's why I'm still free instead of in prison." The two men exchanged glances. They were clearly under pressure to find a replacement driver quickly. "There's a test run tomorrow night," the heavy-set man said. "Small cargo, simple route. If you handle it well, there might be bigger opportunities." Elena nodded. "What kind of cargo?" "The kind you don't ask questions about," he replied. That night, Elena used her encrypted phone to send a message to her support team. She was making progress, but she was also moving into more dangerous territory. The test run they were offering was exactly the kind of opportunity she needed, but it also meant increased risk of exposure. The response from headquarters was brief. "Proceed with extreme caution. We're monitoring." Elena spent the rest of the evening preparing for the test run. She studied maps of the local area and planned escape routes in case something went wrong. She checked her hidden equipment and made sure everything was working properly. The next evening, Elena met the two men at a warehouse near the docks. They introduced her to a truck driver named Rodriguez who would show her the route and evaluate her performance. "This is simple," Rodriguez explained. "Pick up a container at Pier 7, drive it to a warehouse in Glen Burnie and bring back the empty truck. Takes about 2 hours if traffic is good." Elena nodded and climbed into the cab of the delivery truck. The container they were picking up was medium-sized and appeared to be sealed with official customs documents. But Elena noticed that the seal numbers had been tampered with, suggesting that the container had been opened and resealed somewhere between its point of origin and Baltimore. As they drove toward Glen Burnie, Rodriguez asked casual questions about Elena's background. She answered smoothly, sticking to her prepared story but adding small details that made it seem more real. "You seem pretty calm for someone doing this for the first time," Rodriguez observed. "It's not my first time moving things that other people want to keep secret," Elena replied. "I just haven't done it in Baltimore before." When they reached the warehouse in Glen Burnie, Elena helped Rodriguez unload the container. Inside were boxes labeled as automotive parts, but they were much heavier than car parts should be. Elena didn't comment on this, but she made mental notes that she would include in her next report. The return trip went smoothly, and Rodriguez seemed satisfied with Elena's performance. When they got back to the warehouse, he told her that there might be more work available if she was interested. "We'll be in touch," he said. As Elena walked back to her hotel, she felt a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. She was making progress toward infiltrating the smuggling network, but each step took her deeper into a world where discovery meant death. She had already seen enough to know that this organization was moving illegal cargo through Baltimore's port system, but she was still far from identifying the chemical weapons that posed such a threat to American cities. The next phase of her mission would require getting closer to the organization's leadership, and that meant taking even greater risks. But Elena was prepared for whatever came next. She had come too far to turn back now, and too many lives depended on her success. 3 days after the successful test run, Elena received a phone call that changed everything. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, speaking with a slight Russian accent. "This is Dmitri. Rodriguez tells me you did good work the other night. We have a bigger opportunity if you're interested." Elena kept her voice steady despite the excitement she felt. This could be the break she had been waiting for. "I'm always interested in bigger opportunities," she said. "Meet me tonight at the fish market on Eastern Avenue. 10 o'clock. Come alone." The line went dead before Elena could ask any questions. She immediately sent an encrypted message to her support team, letting them know about the meeting. Within minutes, she received a response with background information on Dmitry Volkov, one of Viktor Petrov's most trusted lieutenants. According to intelligence files, Dmitry was responsible for coordinating major smuggling operations along the East Coast. If he was personally meeting with Elena, it meant she was being considered for something important and dangerous. Elena spent the afternoon preparing for the meeting. She reviewed everything she knew about Dmitry and practiced responses to questions he might ask. She also checked her hidden equipment and made sure her emergency beacon was working properly. The fish market was nearly empty when Elena arrived at 10 o'clock. Most of the vendors had closed hours earlier, leaving behind the smell of seafood and the sound of water lapping against the docks. Elena found Dmitry waiting near a closed seafood stand, smoking a cigarette and watching the harbor. He was exactly what Elena had expected, a large man in his 50s with graying hair and cold eyes. His expensive clothes looked out of place in the rundown market, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who wasn't worried about being robbed. "You must be Elena," he said, dropping his cigarette and stepping on it. "That's me," Elena replied. Dmitry studied her face in the dim light from a nearby street lamp. Elena had learned to stay calm during these moments of inspection, knowing that any sign of nervousness could be interpreted as guilt. "Rodriguez says you can be trusted," Dmitry said finally, "but trust is something that must be earned over time." "Are you willing to earn it?" "Depends on what's required," Elena said. Smart answer. Too many people say yes before they know what they're agreeing to. Dmitry started walking along the dock and Elena fell into step beside him. The harbor was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and the occasional horn from a ship. "I need someone to handle a special delivery," Dmitry said. "Very sensitive cargo that requires careful handling and complete discretion." What kind of cargo? Elena asked. The kind that certain government agencies would be very upset to discover. The kind that could cause serious problems for everyone involved if it fell into the wrong hands. Elena's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. This sounded like exactly what she was looking for. I can handle sensitive cargo, she said, but I need to know what kind of risks I'm taking. Dmitri stopped walking and turned to face her. The risks are significant. If you're caught, you'll go to federal prison for a very long time. If you try to betray us, you'll disappear permanently. But if you're successful, you'll be well paid, and there will be more opportunities in the future. Elena pretended to consider this offer while her mind raced. She needed to accept the job to get closer to the chemical weapons, but she also had to be careful not to seem too eager. How well paid? She asked. $50,000 for one night's work, Dmitri replied. It was an enormous amount of money for a simple delivery, which confirmed Elena's suspicion that this cargo was extremely valuable and dangerous. When? She asked. Tomorrow night. You'll pick up a container at a private dock and deliver it to a warehouse in Virginia. Simple route, but timing is critical. Elena nodded. I'll need details about the pickup location and the delivery address. Dmitri handed her a folded piece of paper. Everything you need to know is written there. Memorize it and destroy the paper. If anyone stops you during the delivery, you know nothing about what's in the container. You're just a driver who was paid to move cargo from one place to another. Elena tucked the paper into her jacket pocket. What if something goes wrong? Nothing will go wrong if you follow instructions exactly, Dmitri said. But if there are problems, you're on your own. We don't know you, and you don't know us. It was a stark reminder of how expendable Elena was to these people. They would sacrifice her without hesitation if it served their interests. After Dmitri left, Elena returned to her hotel room and carefully read the paper he had given her. The pickup location was a private marina about 20 miles south of Baltimore. The delivery address was a warehouse in rural Virginia, far from any major population centers. Elena used her encrypted phone to send a detailed report to her support team. She included the pickup and delivery locations, the timeline, and her assessment that this cargo might be related to the chemical weapons they were trying to intercept. The response came back within an hour. High probability this is the target shipment. Proceed with mission, but prepare for immediate extraction if necessary. Surveillance teams will be positioned along your route. Knowing that backup would be nearby made Elena feel slightly better about the risks she was taking, but she also knew that if something went wrong, help might not arrive in time. Elena spent the next morning conducting surveillance of the pickup location. The marina was small and private, with only a few boats and no security guards. It looked like the kind of place where illegal cargo could be loaded and unloaded without attracting attention. That afternoon, Elena received another phone call from Dmitri. There's been a change in plans, he said. You'll have a passenger for the delivery, someone who needs to make sure the cargo reaches its destination safely. Elena's heart sank. Having a passenger would make everything more complicated and dangerous. If the passenger was armed and suspicious, it would be much harder for Elena to communicate with her support team or take any action if necessary. What kind of passenger? She asked. Someone who represents the people receiving the cargo. He'll ride with you to make sure there are no problems. I work better alone, Elena said. This is not negotiable, Dmitri replied firmly. The passenger goes with you or the deal is off. Elena had no choice but to agree. She sent another encrypted message to her team, warning them about the change in plans. The response was immediate. Passenger complicates extraction. Exercise extreme caution. That evening, Elena arrived at the marina at the appointed time. A large container truck was waiting near the dock, and she could see a shipping container being loaded by a small crane. Two men were supervising the operation, but they didn't acknowledge Elena's presence. When the loading was complete, Elena climbed into the truck's cab and started the engine. A moment later, the passenger door opened and a man got in beside her. He was young, maybe 30 years old, with short dark hair and the kind of alertness that suggested military or law enforcement training. I'm Pavel, he said with a slight accent that Elena couldn't quite identify. I'll be riding with you tonight. Elena nodded and put the truck in gear. As they drove away from the marina, she tried to assess her passenger without being obvious about it. Pavel sat quietly, but his eyes constantly scanned the road ahead and the mirrors, watching for signs of surveillance. Nice night for a drive, Elena said, trying to start a conversation. Pavel grunted but didn't respond. It was clear that he wasn't interested in small talk. As they headed south toward Virginia, Elena realized that this delivery was different from anything she had done before. The container they were carrying could contain the chemical weapons that threatened thousands of lives. The man sitting next to her might be a terrorist or someone working directly for them. Elena was now deeper in enemy territory than she had ever been, surrounded by people who would kill her instantly if they discovered her true identity. But she was also closer than ever to completing her mission and preventing a catastrophic attack on American soil. The highway stretched ahead into the darkness, leading toward a confrontation that would determine whether Elena's cover held up under the ultimate test. In a few hours, she would either succeed in her mission or face consequences that didn't bear thinking about. The warehouse in Virginia appeared exactly as Dmitri had described it. Isolated, surrounded by empty fields, and dark except for a single light above the main entrance. Elena parked the truck near the loading dock as Pavel watched everything around them with suspicious eyes. "Wait here," Pavel said, getting out of the truck. Through her side mirror, Elena watched him walk to a small office building next to the warehouse. A few minutes later, he returned with two other men who looked like they could handle serious trouble. "Everything checks out," Pavel said, climbing back into the cab. Backed the truck up to the loading dock. Elena maneuvered the truck into position while the two men operated a forklift to unload the container. As they worked, she noticed that Pavel was no longer watching the surrounding area. Instead, he was watching her. "You did good work tonight," he said. "Dmitri was right about you." "Just following instructions," Elena replied. "Most drivers ask questions about cargo like this." "You haven't asked anything." Elena shrugged. "I learned a long time ago that some questions are better left unasked." Pavel smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "You know what's in that container, don't you?" Elena's blood ran cold, but she kept her voice steady. "I know it's valuable and dangerous. That's enough for me." "It's enough to kill everyone in Washington, D.C., Pavel said quietly. "Chemical weapons that my organization has spent 2 years acquiring." Elena felt her world shift. Pavel had just confessed to being part of a terrorist plot, and she was sitting in a truck cab with no backup in sight. She needed to stay calm and figure out how to handle this situation without getting herself killed. "That's above my pay grade," she said. Pavel studied her face in the dim light from the dashboard. "You're very calm for someone who just learned she helped transport weapons of mass destruction." "I've transported a lot of things I didn't want to think about too carefully," Elena replied. But Pavel's expression was changing. The casual suspicion was becoming something more focused and dangerous. "You know what I find interesting?" he said. "Most criminals I've worked with have tells, little nervous habits when they're lying or scared. But you don't seem to have any." Elena's hand slowly moved toward the special pen in her jacket pocket. Pavel was getting too close to the truth, and she might need to act quickly. "Maybe, I'm just good at staying calm," she said. "Or maybe, you've had professional training in staying calm under pressure." The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Elena could see in Pavel's eyes that he was no longer just suspicious. He was convinced that she wasn't who she claimed to be. "Professional training in what?" Elena asked, buying time while she prepared to defend herself. "Military training, special operations training, the kind of training that would make someone very good at pretending to be someone else." Pavel's hand was moving toward his jacket, probably reaching for a weapon. Elena knew she had seconds to act before this conversation turned deadly. "You're being paranoid," she said. "Am I? Let me ask you something, Elena. What's your real name?" Elena looked directly into Pavel's eyes. There was no point in maintaining the deception any longer. He had figured out that she wasn't really a criminal, and now her only option was to use her training to survive. "My real name is Admiral Sarah Martinez," she said calmly. "United States Navy SEALs." Pavel's eyes widened in shock, but before he could reach his weapon, Elena had already twisted the top of her pen and driven the ceramic blade into his neck with surgical precision. Pavel collapsed against the passenger door, unconscious but alive. Elena immediately activated her emergency beacon and sent a priority message to her support team. "Cover blown. Request immediate backup. Chemical weapons confirmed at delivery location." Through the truck's windshield, she could see that the two men unloading the container had noticed that something was wrong in the cab. One of them was pulling out a phone, probably to call for reinforcements. Elena stepped out of the truck and approached the men with her hands visible but ready to move quickly. Her SEAL training was fully engaged now, and the nervous criminal Elena Vasquez had been replaced by one of the most dangerous operatives in the American military. "Gentlemen, I'm going to need you to step away from that container," she said in a voice that carried absolute authority. The two men looked at her in confusion. A moment earlier, she had been just a truck driver. Now she sounded like someone who was used to giving orders and having them obeyed. "Who the hell are you?" one of them demanded. "I'm the person who's going to prevent you from killing thousands of innocent people," Sarah replied. The man with the phone started dialing a number, probably trying to warn someone that their operation had been compromised. Sarah moved faster than either man could react, disarming him and sending him to the ground with a quick combination of strikes that left him stunned but conscious. The second man tried to run, but Sarah caught him before he reached the corner of the warehouse. She had been trained to handle multiple opponents simultaneously, and two panicked criminals were not much of a challenge for someone with her skills. Within minutes, both men were secured with zip ties that Sarah had taken from her equipment kit. She then approached the container to examine its contents using a small flashlight to peer inside. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. The container held dozens of metal canisters labeled with chemical symbols that she recognized from her training in weapons of mass destruction. There was enough chemical agent here to contaminate several city blocks and kill thousands of people. Sarah's encrypted phone buzzed with a message from her support team. "Backup en route. 15 minutes, local authorities notified." 15 minutes felt like an eternity when she was guarding chemical weapons in the middle of nowhere with 3 unconscious criminals. But Sarah had been in worse situations before, and she knew how to stay alert and ready for anything. As she waited for backup to arrive, Sarah thought about the parking garage where this all began. 3 drunk men had thought they could intimidate a woman walking alone at night. They had no idea that they were dealing with someone who regularly faced much more dangerous opponents. Now, a terrorist organization had made the same mistake. They had assumed that Elena Vasquez was just another small-time criminal looking to make money. They never suspected that she was actually one of the most highly trained operatives in the American military. The sound of approaching helicopters broke the silence of the Virginia countryside. Sarah looked up to see military aircraft circling the warehouse, their searchlights illuminating the area like daylight. Within minutes, the warehouse was surrounded by federal agents and military personnel. Admiral Patterson was among the first people to reach Sarah. He looked relieved but not surprised to find her standing calmly next to the secured container and 3 subdued criminals. "Good work, Admiral," he said. "How did they figure out your identity?" "They didn't figure it out," Sarah replied. "I told them who I was." Patterson raised an eyebrow. "That's not usually how undercover operations work." Sarah smiled. "Sometimes the best way to handle a situation is to stop pretending and start being who you really are." As the cleanup operation continued around them, Sarah watched the chemical weapons being carefully secured for transport to a military facility where they would be safely destroyed. The terrorist plot had been stopped, and thousands of lives had been saved. Later, as Sarah drove back to Baltimore in her own car, she thought about the lesson that everyone involved had learned. The 3 men in the parking garage had discovered that a woman walking alone at night might be more dangerous than they imagined. The terrorist organization had learned that their careful security measures couldn't protect them from someone who was better, trained and more determined than they were. But the most important lesson was one that Sarah had learned about herself. After years of meetings and desk work, she had wondered if she still had what it took to handle field operations. Tonight had proven that her skills were still sharp and her instincts were still reliable. As she pulled into her apartment's parking garage, Sarah smiled at the irony. She was back where her adventure had started, but everything had changed. The quiet woman who had been attacked by 3 strangers was the same person who had just prevented a chemical weapons attack on American soil. Sarah Martinez had many identities: truck driver, criminal, undercover operative, and military officer. But underneath all of those roles, she was simply someone who had sworn to protect her country and the people in it. That oath had guided her through every dangerous situation, and it would continue to guide her through whatever challenges lay ahead. The rain was falling again as Sarah walked to her apartment, but this time she wasn't worried about strangers in the shadows. After tonight, she was confident that she could handle whatever life threw at her. Whether it was 3 drunk men in a parking garage or an international terrorist conspiracy, Sarah Martinez was exactly who she appeared to be, one of the most dangerous people in the world when it came to protecting the innocent and stopping those who would do them harm.